What kind of PC would you build for $1,000? Would you go for a pure gaming build and dump all of your money into a GPU? Or would you try to get your hands on as many cores as possible for some serious content creation workloads? Would you prioritize something else? Well, the folks at AMD challenged me to do just that, build a $1,000 PC using current AMD hardware. A good challenge indeed, and one I am ready to take on. I was so curious about what kind of build I could come up with using those guidelines, I actually couldn't settle on making just one version. So instead, I'm making two different builds. Not only that, I'm going to do some quick testing on each system once they're built to figure out what you can expect from such a configuration. So my goal for this video is twofold: to offer some insight into how I go about picking parts for a build, and to see just what kind of options there are out there at this price point if you're looking to build with current AMD parts. Yes, this video is sponsored by AMD, but all they did was pose the initial question and they had no final input into which parts I picked and why. All of this was built out with my own recommendations and what I would actually do in this scenario. Now, I've actually been working on these builds for months now and was able to take advantage of some awesome sales and bundles that are out there. Now, keep in mind your mileage will vary based on many factors, but I was pleasantly surprised with some of the deals I was able to take advantage of currently. But I did have to make some tough decisions, so hopefully my struggles can help you make your own decisions when you spec out a new system. With that out of the way, let's go over the goals of each build and why I picked the parts I did. First up, let's talk about the gaming rig, and this one is all about the GPU. At the heart of it is a Radeon RX 7700 XT. Now this is a Sapphire Pulse version, and I've used many Sapphire cards over the years, and they're one of the first vendors that I look at when I'm looking at Radeon cards. And we're gonna see awesome 1080p, 1440p, and maybe even some light 4K gaming. So I'm confident that I dumped as much money as I wanted to into the GPU without sacrificing too much of the other system. Speaking of the other system, it was really based around this awesome bundle that I got that included a Ryzen 7 7700X with a MSI Pro B650P Wi-Fi motherboard and 32 gigabytes of G.Skill RAM. Like, this was an awesome deal, and this is definitely overkill for gaming. Like 8 cores is definitely good enough. I like the port selection on this motherboard, but that bundle was like something that was awesome to jump on, and it's gonna be more than enough for all around, and a fantastic price for sure. Now, to cool off this 8-core CPU, I actually decided to go with the Thermalright Assassin King 120 SE. Now, for a single tower cooler, this is one of the great price to performance options out there, especially at this wattage. And if this rig is mostly going to be doing gaming, I'm not worried about using this cooler in this setup. So the SSD I went with is a Crucial P3 Plus. It is a Gen 4 NVMe drive. It's 1 terabyte, which I wish I actually was able to get a little more storage for games, but 1 terabyte is definitely enough to have a good number of games on your system and the OS as well. So it's kind of, once again, maybe a little bit overkill. I probably could have went with a Gen 3 drive and just been completely happy with it, but also wanted to be ready for more direct storage games that are coming out in the future. For the power supply, I actually reached out to the fine folks over on our Full Nerd Discord to find something that was a good budget option, but something that was going to be reliable, and it didn't have to be fancy. For that, they recommended the Thermaltake BM2 750 watts. Once again, nothing fancy here, but 750 watts is definitely more than enough that I need for this setup, and maybe even to grow into a little bit later. So that was the option I picked for the power supply. And last up is the case, and for that I went with the tried and true Montech X3 Mesh. Now, Elena did a video on this case a while ago when it came out, and it's definitely one of those really good budget options out there. Lots of fans, good airflow, but also I got the white version, and if you couldn't tell, I also got the white version of the tower cooler, so I've got a little bit of a black and white theme in here, but then plenty of RGB to go around as well. So I actually personally haven't built in the X3 Mesh, so I'm pretty interested to see how it goes, but I think all in all, with the parts that I picked, it's something a little more stylistic, It's got great specs as it is now, but then even a little bit more room to grow. Over the course of speccing this gaming system out, I kind of went back and forth a lot on a lot of different parts. You know, I definitely could have gotten away with a cheaper CPU and motherboard, and even 16 gigs of RAM I probably could have gotten away with. But man, the bundle deal I got on this was worth the little bit of extra price that I paid for it. And once again, like I feel like this future-proofs me a little bit in being able to kind of upgrade to something else. So I think it was worth the cost. And then I really tried to work hard to try to step up to a 7800 XT versus a 7700 XT. But once again, I didn't want to sacrifice too much in too many areas. Like I feel like you don't want to have like a really weak link in the system, and I feel like for a pure gaming build, this is a solid setup, and this is going to do some really awesome performance. Next up, let's discuss my content creation build. Now I knew exactly what I wanted from this one. I wanted to get as many cores as possible without sacrificing too much of the other system. But for this one, for Adobe Premiere, for Adobe Lightroom, you know, I wanted a CPU that had as many cores as possible. And luckily, I was able to get a Ryzen 9 7900X with 12 cores in a bundle with a motherboard and 64 gigs of RAM. This is like an awesome deal, and I actually got it for $550, so that was half my budget right there. 12 cores is more than enough to do some awesome content creation on, and while I wish I could have got 16 cores, like I think it just would have stressed the budget a little too much. But this deal was too good to pass up. I mean, 64 gigs of DDR5 RAM rated at 6,000 mega transfers per second. The motherboard is an Asus ROG Strix B650EF gaming Wi-Fi. This does have a lot of the things that I personally want in a motherboard that's based around content creation. We got a 2.5 gig Ethernet slot. We have 3 NVMe SSD slots, and even expansion for external 2.5 inch drives if I really wanted to add more bulk storage to it. So apart from the CPU and getting as many cores as I can, the next big consideration for me in a content creation build is the drives. Now the configuration I like to go with is to have multiple drives that do different things and try to get as much space as I can with them. But for this build, I ended up going with a Crucial P3 Plus as a smaller OS drive that's going to have the OS, the applications, some light file usage. But really most of the files that I'm going to use for content creation are going to be on the SolidDim P41 Plus. Now both of these drives aren't like the fastest, you know, in class out there, but they're really good workhorse drives, and they're going to be stable, especially for content creation. You're going to want drives that are not going to die on you. To cool off the CPU, I did know I wanted to go with a dual tower cooler, and this Peerless Assassin 120 is definitely one of those ones that's top rated for the price. This thing's only $25, and it performs really well, especially under high stress loads like content creation. So I'm curious to see for myself how this performs, because I actually have never built with one of these dual tower coolers, but this is something I kind of had my eye on when speccing out this system, so I'm glad I was able to sneak that in there. So the next thing I considered was GPU, and it's not as important, obviously, as the gaming build, so I didn't really need to spend a ton of money on it, but I wanted to get something good, especially with newer features. For that, I went with the Radeon RX 7600. This is the XFX Swift 210 model, and I was also looking at the slightly older 6650 XT, but I went and spent a little bit more money on the 7600 for two reasons. Number one is that AV1 support. Now AV1 is definitely in its infancy, but a lot of these video editing applications and even streaming things like OBS are picking up AV1 support very quickly, and I wanted to be able to have that at my disposal. But then the other thing is RDNA 3 support, especially in things like OBS. AMD has worked with the team over at OBS to get more support and better performance out of RDNA 3. So once again, I think it was worth it to spend a little bit more. Next up is the power supply, and once again, it was a recommendation from our fine folks over at Discord, and it was a Thermaltake BM2. Now this is a slightly lower wattage at 650, which to tell you the truth, I'm not in bad territory here. This build is going to work just fine at 650 650 watts. I do wish I could have eked out a little bit more to get 750 watts, but when playing with such slim margins, you know, I felt comfortable in getting this one and kind of having enough to get by for what I need, especially for these heavy CPU loads, where this Ryzen 9 is not going to push a ton of wattage at it. Last up is the case. Now, I knew with this heavy CPU workload, with this dual tower cooler, I wanted something that was going to have really good airflow from front to back. With that, I picked the Fantex G300A. Now, this one is the one that comes stock with just one fan, so I did spend a little bit to get an extra fan, but this case is really well reviewed, especially for the price point, and I'm not too worried about the thermal performance of it. I've used Fantex cases in the past, and I like the build quality. I like the look of it. Sure, it's not as flashy with the white and the tons of RGB as the gaming one, but you know, this is a little more subtle for work and business use. Now, when I was kind of going back and forth and kind of speccing out these systems, once again, I really tried to put as much money into the CPU as I could. I was glad I was able to get that bundle, but the biggest downside for me is probably the power supply. I wish I could have got just a little bit bigger of a power supply, but also the storage. I wish I could have got one more drive to have in the system. This motherboard does have support for 3 M.2 slots, so I wish I could have had a third drive to either back up the files to, or just have kind of a split between video files and photo files. But this is what I'm working with, and at least I know in the future you could put another drive in there. So all in all, like, for months I kind of went back and forth on a lot of these parts on these builds, and I actually ended up kind of re-speccing out multiple times over the course of the months, depending on what I wanted to prioritize, but also the deals and the newer things that are coming out. But I think these are damn solid good systems, and I'm really excited to kind of see what performance we get out of them when I put it through its paces. So now that we've discussed all the parts and the goals for each one of them, let's roll into some beautiful build footage. Okay, these systems are built, and I will tell you what, they turned out really awesome. Now, over a decade ago when I built my first rig for about $800, they did not turn out anywhere near as nice as this system's here. And it's funny because both of them really do have kind of a unique look. This one has got that all jet black aesthetic. It is literally almost all black except for one postcode light on the motherboard, where this one, It's all RGB, baby. Obviously, I do wish that some of the components in there could have been all white, but when you're looking for deals, you can take what you can get. But now let's get into some performance, and I do want to stress that this is not a review. I'm not going in there and hand tweaking settings and making sure everything's set perfectly and like for like the way that I would for a CPU and GPU review. This is firing up some applications and some games and kind of getting a kind of feel for what these systems are capable of, to then kind of compare and contrast and be like, okay, you know what, actually I would like more CPU power, or you know what, I actually would like more GPU power. And I broke up the testing into two categories: content creation and gaming. Obviously, the bigger CPU should favor content creation, and the bigger GPU should favor gaming, but some of the results were quite surprising, so let's dig in. Now for content creation, obviously there are applications that can use the extra cores that are in that 7900X. And if you work in one of those applications, you know you need those extra cores. I do want to point out one quick thing, and that's in Cinebench. I did go and cross-reference these CPU numbers back when I was testing them a couple months ago with a 360mm AIO cooler, and the results that I got here were within margin of error of the numbers that I got previously, meaning that the towers that I have on here, the towers that I picked, are actually performing adequately for the chips that they're put on. Moving over to video and photo applications, I gotta tell you the truth, I was a little surprised by these results. I thought the applications like Lightroom and Premiere would very much favor the extra cores in that 7900X, but I was surprised some of those workloads actually favored the beefier GPU in that 7700 XT. Neither scenario is a slouch. I just thought that the 7900X would pull away even further, but once again, that I say with all these content creation workloads is that you have to go in and kind of look at what you're doing in that application. Yes, PCWorld tries to get a snapshot of all the things that you could be doing in these systems, but it really boils down to what you're doing on the system, and you kind of need to look a little bit further to see, oh, you know what, okay, what I do actually is going to favor more cores, or what I do is actually going to favor a bigger GPU. Speaking of bigger GPU, let's move over to the gaming results. And I do want to say I configured these games in the way that I would personally just playing the games rather than stress testing them for a review. Meaning, most of these games I set at somewhere in the high preset rather than pushing it all the way to the ultra. And if they had some sort of upscaling technology available to them, I'd like to use that, as long as it's not too much of a detriment to image quality. But looking at the results split up into 1080p and 1440p, the 7600 at 1080p is getting close to 120 FPS in the games that I tested and using the settings that I tested it at. But of course that 7700 XT is going to do better, and it's getting 160 FPS or more at 1080p. So in both scenarios, you can game quite well on these systems. Now switching over to 1440p, that 7600X is still comfortably over 60 FPS in the games that I tested and with the settings that I tested at. But that 7600 XT is able to push even further and get 120 FPS or more in these scenarios. So either way, I do feel pretty good about the gaming chops of these systems. So now let's finish up with some final thoughts. And first, I want to say that it was actually pretty fun to test these systems, even though they weren't like for like. It was interesting to go in there and be like, okay, where can you really get more from a bigger CPU? And then conversely, where can you get more from a bigger GPU? Now, I want to hear in the comments below which one you prefer. For me, I actually like the aesthetics of the all black of this build, but I actually like the more well-rounded performance of the 7700 Duo. I feel like that mixture of the 7700X and the 7700 XT is a pretty damn good sweet spot, especially for this price point. But I want to hear your thoughts and how you would kind of reconfigure some of these things, or maybe you have a rig and got some of these bundled deals. Let me know kind of what you ended up going with. But either way, this was a fun challenge, and I definitely learned a lot, not only on the performance side, but also in the budgeting side, because as everyone knows, when you sit down and you've only got a limited budget to work with, you're sitting there scratching your head and kind of reconfiguring things to try to get what you want. So it was really fun to kind of sit down and do it. And I want to thank AMD for putting this challenge my way and letting me do this, because it was definitely beneficial, and I hope you enjoyed it too. But as always, always, let me know what you thought of this challenge in the comments, and until the next video, be sure to subscribe here on PC World for more PC hardware and software goodness. We'll check you out in the next one.